There's a reason why billionaires, world-class athletes, and the most successful people you know all share one specific trait that has nothing to do with talent or intelligence or even luck. And it's the same trait that Marcus Aurelius mastered while ruling the most powerful empire in human history. And it's the ability to control their desires instead of being controlled by them. Which sounds simple until you realize that 99% of people are completely enslaved to whatever their brain tells them they want in any given moment, whether that's junk food, social media dopamine, sexual gratification, material possessions, or validation from others. And the devastating truth that nobody wants to hear is that every single desire you can't control is actively stealing your freedom, your power, and your ability to build anything meaningful with your life. The ancient Stoics discovered 5 specific lessons about desire that completely changed how they experienced reality. And I'm not talking about suppressing what you want or living like a monk. I'm talking about a sophisticated understanding of how desire actually works in your brain and how to rewire it so that you're pursuing what you genuinely value instead of chasing every shiny object your primitive brain thinks will make you happy. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why your current relationship with desire is probably destroying your potential and exactly how to transform it using principles that have worked for 2,000 years. Now, before we dive into these 5 lessons that are going to completely change how you see desire, I need to tell you about something that pairs perfectly with what we're covering today, and that's the subconscious millionaire system that I've linked in the description, because here's the reality. Everything we're talking about in this video involves reprogramming your subconscious mind to stop reacting automatically to every desire and start responding consciously based on your values. And that system gives you the exact framework for rewriting those deep subconscious patterns around desire, money, success, and self-control. So if you're serious about actually implementing what you learned today, instead of just feeling inspired for 24 hours and then going back to your old patterns, check out that link after this video because it's going to give you the tools to make this transformation permanent. But right now, let's talk about the first lesson that the Stoics learned about. Desire that most people never figure out in their entire lives. The first lesson that Epictetus taught his students is that desires are not objective facts about the world. They're judgments that your mind is making about objects or experiences. And this distinction is absolutely critical because most people go through life believing that certain things are inherently desirable and therefore they have no choice but to want them. But the Stoics recognize that desire only exists in the relationship between your mind and the object, not in the object itself. Which means you have way more control over what you want than you think you do. Think about it like this. There's no property called deliciousness that exists inside a cheeseburger independent of a mind perceiving it. A cow doesn't look at grass and think it's delicious the way you think about your favorite food, and a fish doesn't desire to be on land the way you might desire a beach vacation, which proves that desire is always a mental construct. It's your brain adding a layer of interpretation and judgment onto neutral sensory data, and then convincing you that the interpretation is reality. Marcus Aurelius practices this constantly in his meditations by describing luxurious things and their basic physical components to strip away the judgments. So instead of seeing a fancy meal as this amazing desirable experience, he describes it as dead plants and dead animals being ground up by your teeth and mixed with saliva and acid. And suddenly the glamour disappears and you see it for what it actually is. And the same technique applies to literally every desire. You have that luxury car you think you need is just metal and plastic shaped in a particular way. That validation you're craving from social media is just photons hitting your retina in patterns that your brain interprets as approval. That sexual experience you're obsessing over is just biochemical reactions and nerve impulses that your mind has wrapped in fantasy and anticipation. The reason this lesson is so powerful is because once you realize that you're the one creating the sense of desirability through your judgments, you can change those judgments and therefore change what you want, which gives you an incredible amount of freedom because you're no longer at the mercy of external circumstances or the random firings of your dopamine system. Here's the practical application that most people miss. When you feel a strong desire arising, instead of immediately trying to satisfy it or suppress it, You pause, and you examine the judgments you're making that are creating the desire in the first place. You ask yourself, what am I telling myself about this object or experience that makes it seem so necessary for my happiness? What story am I believing about what will happen if I get this thing or don't get this thing? And when you bring conscious awareness to those underlying judgments, they lose their automatic power over you because you realize they're optional interpretations rather than unchangeable facts. The Stoics understood that most of our desires are actually desires for feelings rather than for the objects themselves. You don't want the expensive watch. You want the feeling of status or success that you think the watch will give you. You don't want the sexual experience. You want the feeling of being desired or the temporary escape from discomfort. And once you recognize that you're chasing feelings, you can start asking whether there are better ways to generate those feelings that don't involve giving away your power to external circumstances that you can't control. The second lesson that Epicurus and the Stoics both emphasized is the crucial distinction between natural desires and vain desires. And this might be the most practical framework in all of ancient philosophy, because it gives you a clear system for evaluating which desires are worth pursuing and which are literally just traps that will consume your entire life without ever bringing real satisfaction. Natural desires, according to the Stoics, are things like food when you're hungry, water when you're thirsty, shelter when you're cold, basic human connection, and belonging. And these desires have natural limits built into them, meaning once you're no longer hungry, the desire for food disappears on its own. You don't keep eating forever because the need has been met and the desire naturally subsides. And this is the key characteristic that separates healthy desires from destructive ones. Vain desires, on the other hand, are completely different because they have no natural stopping point. The desire for wealth never says, okay, I have enough now, I'm satisfied. The desire for fame never says this level of recognition is sufficient, I can stop now. The desire for sexual novelty never says I've had enough variety, I'm content. And this is by design because these desires aren't actually tied to real needs. They're tied to the ego's endless hunger for more, for better, for different. And your ego can never be satisfied because its entire existence depends on maintaining a sense of lack and incompleteness. Seneca writes about meeting incredibly wealthy Romans who were absolutely miserable despite having everything they thought they wanted. And the reason is because they built their entire lives around pursuing desires that by their very nature can never bring lasting satisfaction. They're on a hedonic treadmill where every achievement or acquisition briefly feels good and then immediately becomes the new baseline, and they're back to wanting more. Here's where this gets really practical. The Stoics weren't saying you should only pursue natural desires and completely give up on everything else. What they're saying is that you need to be extremely conscious about which category your desires fall into so that you can adjust your expectations accordingly. If you're going to pursue wealth or status or achievement, you need to understand going in that these things will never fill the hole inside you that you think they will. They could be useful tools for building a meaningful life, but they cannot be the source of your happiness or contentment because they're vain desires by nature. The trap that destroys most people's lives is that they postpone their happiness waiting for some external milestone. They tell themselves, I'll be happy when I make 6 figures, when I get the promotion, when I find the perfect partner, when I have 1 million followers, and then they achieve those things and discover that the feeling of emptiness is still there. And instead of questioning the entire premise, they just set a new milestone and keep running on the same treadmill, expecting different results. The Stoic solution is to recognize that the only desires worth organizing your life around are ones that involve becoming rather than having. The desire to develop courage, wisdom, integrity, self-control, creativity. These are desires that can actually be fulfilled because they're about internal development rather than external acquisition. And paradoxically, once you stop chasing vain desires and focus on natural ones plus virtue development, you often end up achieving the external stuff anyway, but from a place of abundance rather than desperate lack. Marcus Aurelius had unlimited access to every pleasure and luxury the ancient world could offer, and he specifically chose to live simply and focus on philosophy and duty, not because he was a masochist, but because he understood that real power comes from not needing things, from being complete within yourself regardless of external circumstances. And that's a level of freedom that no amount of money or status or pleasure can buy. And this is exactly why I'm so passionate about the subconscious millionaire system that I've got linked in the description. Because what we're really talking about here is reprogramming the subconscious belief that drive your desires in the first place. Most people are walking around with subconscious programming from childhood and society that tells them they need certain things to be worthy or happy or successful. And until you address that programming at the root level, you're going to keep experiencing the same patterns of chasing desires that don't actually serve you. That system gives you the specific techniques for identifying and rewriting those subconscious programs so that your desires naturally align with what you actually value instead of what your conditioning tells you to want. So if you're finding these Stoic principles valuable and you want a complete framework for implementing them at the deepest level of your psychology, definitely check out that resource because it's going to make everything we're talking about exponentially more effective. But let's keep going because the next 3 lessons are where this really gets powerful. The third lesson is probably the most counterintuitive one, and it's the paradox that the Stoics discovered that you gain control over your desires by letting go of the need to control them. And I know that sounds like spiritual nonsense, but there's actually sophisticated psychology behind this that modern research on ironic process theory has confirmed. Here's what happens in your brain when you try to suppress a desire through sheer willpower. You create what psychologists call the white bear effect, which comes from an experiment where people were told don't think about a white bear, and that instruction made it impossible to think about anything else. The act of trying to suppress the thought actually kept it active in consciousness. And the exact same thing happens with desire. When you tell yourself, I will not eat that cookie, I will not check social media, I will not think about that person, you're keeping the object of desire at the center of your attention and actually strengthening the neural pathways associated with wanting it. The Stoic approach is completely different because instead of trying to suppress the desire, you practice indifference to whether it's satisfied or not, which Epictetus describes as wanting what happens rather than trying to make what you want happen. And this might sound passive, but it's actually the most powerful position possible because you're removing the emotional charge from the desire. You're no longer in a state of desperate need or frantic suppression. You're in a state of calm. Observation where the desire can be present without controlling your behavior. Think about the difference between a child having a tantrum because they can't have candy versus an adult who notices they want candy and then calmly decides whether eating it aligns with their goals or not. The adult has the same desire, but there's no emotional reactivity attached to it. It's just information rather than a command that must be obeyed. The practical technique the Stoics used is called voluntary discomfort, where you deliberately practice experiencing desire without satisfying it, not as punishment, but as training to prove to yourself that the desire is not an emergency that requires immediate action. So you might feel hungry and wait an extra hour before eating, or feel cold and not immediately put on a jacket, or feel bored and not immediately reach for your phone. And what you're doing is creating space between stimulus and response. You're training your nervous system that discomfort and unsatisfied desire are not dangerous. They're just temporary sensations that will pass on their own if you don't engage with them. Marcus Aurelius writes that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you'll find strength. And what he means is that the moment you stop trying to control external circumstances and instead focus on controlling your internal response, you actually become way more effective at shaping your life because you're working with reality rather than fighting against it. Here's the part that nobody tells you. When you stop trying to control your desires and instead practice indifference to them, something remarkable happens after a few weeks. The desires start to naturally diminish in intensity because you're no longer feeding them with attention and emotional energy. It's like a fire that dies out when you stop adding fuel. And what remains are your authentic values and genuine preferences rather than the compulsive reactive patterns that were running your life. The goal isn't to have no desires. The goal is to have desires that serve you rather than enslave you. And the way you get there is through this paradoxical practice of letting go of the need to control them while simultaneously taking complete responsibility for how you respond to them. The fourth lesson is one of the most powerful Stoic practices, and it's called premeditatio malorum, or the premeditation of evils. And this is where the Stoics completely flip the script on how most people think about desire, because instead of fantasizing about getting what they want, they practice visualizing not getting it and being okay anyway, which trains your mind to decouple your happiness from external outcomes. Seneca advises spending time each day imagining losing everything you have: your wealth, your health, your relationships, your status. Not to be pessimistic, but to reduce your attachment to these things so that you can enjoy them while they're here without being destroyed if they disappear. And this practice directly attacks the root of desire, because most desires are fueled by the belief that you absolutely need something to be happy, that your life will be incomplete without it. And when you practice being okay without it in your imagination, you realize that you're actually more resilient than you thought. Here's how this applies to controlling desires in your daily life. Before you pursue something you want, you spend time vividly imagining not getting it and experiencing the disappointment, and then adapting and moving forward anyway. So if you're obsessing over getting a promotion, you imagine being passed over and then visualizing how you would maintain your self-respect and continue developing regardless. If you're craving validation from someone, you imagine them rejecting you and then visualizing how you would validate yourself internally instead. And what happens through this practice is that the desire loses its urgent, desperate quality because you've already proven to yourself mentally that you don't actually need it. The Stoics understood something profound about the psychology of desire, which is that we're not actually afraid of not getting what we want. We're afraid of the story we're telling ourselves about what it will mean if we don't get it. We're afraid that if we don't get the promotion, it means we're not good enough. That if we don't get the relationship, it means we're unlovable. That if we don't achieve the goal, it means we're a failure. And those stories are what create the desperate clinging energy around desire. Premeditatio malorum directly addresses those stories by forcing you to confront the worst-case scenario and realize that it's not actually as catastrophic as your anxiety is telling you it is. You're imagining yourself surviving and adapting and finding other sources of meaning and value. And once you've mentally rehearsed that, the desire transforms from this life or death urgency into a preference, something you'd like to have, but that you don't need for your fundamental sense of okayness. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly, reminding himself that he could lose the throne, lose his family, lose his health, and he would still have his capacity for reason and virtue which nobody could take from him. And that perspective made him incredibly effective as a leader because he wasn't making decisions from a place of fear and scarcity. He was making them from a place of strength and abundance because his core identity wasn't dependent on external outcomes. The modern application of this is incredibly practical. Before you chase any desire, before you pursue any goal, you do the premeditatio malorum practice and ask yourself, if I don't get this thing, can I still live a meaningful and happy life? And if the honest answer is no, then you know your desire has become an attachment that's making you fragile, and you need to work on your internal foundation before you pursue the external goal. Because if you're not okay without it, you won't actually be okay with it either. You'll just find new things to be anxious about losing. The Stoics weren't pessimists. They were realists who understood that true confidence comes from knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you, not from trying to control circumstances to prevent bad things from happening. The fifth and final lesson is the most advanced Stoic practice, and it's about transforming desire from something that controls you into fuel for your highest purpose. And this is where we move beyond just managing desire to actually leveraging it as a source of energy and motivation. The Stoics recognize that desire itself isn't the problem. The problem is misdirected desire that's been hijacked by your lower impulses and conditioned by society to want things that don't actually serve your development. But when you redirect that same energy toward virtue and meaningful goals, it becomes an incredibly powerful force. Marcus Aurelius talks about how the obstacle becomes the way, and the same principle applies to desire. The sexual energy that you might be wasting on empty pursuits can be channeled into creative work. The desire for validation that you might be wasting on social media can be channeled into building something valuable that earns genuine respect. The desire for comfort that you might be wasting on immediate gratification can be channeled into the satisfaction of delayed gratification and compound growth. This practice is sometimes called sublimation in psychology, and it's one of the most mature and effective defense mechanisms we have. You're not suppressing the desire or pretending it doesn't exist. You're acknowledging the energy behind it and consciously redirecting it toward higher aims. So every time you feel a strong desire arising, instead of either indulging it or fighting it, you ask yourself, what is the energy behind this desire, and how can I channel it into something that aligns with my values and long-term vision? The Stoics believe that every human being has a daimon, which is like an inner genius or divine spark that represents your highest potential. And the goal of life is to align all your desires and actions with that daimon, to organize your entire existence around becoming the person you're capable of becoming rather than chasing every random impulse that crosses your mind. Here's the practical implementation. You need a vision that's compelling enough to redirect your desires toward it. Because if you don't have something meaningful to channel your energy into, you're going to default back to whatever provides immediate gratification. So you need to get absolutely clear on what you're building with your life, what legacy you want to leave, what kind of person you want to become. And that vision needs to be so vivid and compelling that when you feel desire arising, you can consciously choose to channel that energy toward your vision instead of wasting it on empty pursuits. The Stoics weren't against pleasure or enjoyment. They were against being enslaved to it. And there's a huge difference between consciously choosing to enjoy something as part of a balanced life versus compulsively needing it because you're trying to fill a void inside yourself. And when you have a clear vision and you're channeling your desires toward it, you actually experience more genuine pleasure because it comes from a place of abundance rather than desperate lack. So let's bring all 5 lessons together. First, recognize that desires are judgments your mind is making rather than objective facts, which means you have way more control than you think. Second, distinguish between natural desires with built-in limits and vain desires that will never bring lasting satisfaction, and organize your life around the natural ones plus virtue development. Third, understand the paradox that you control desires by letting go of the need to control them and practicing indifference. Fourth, use premeditatio malorum to reduce attachment and transform desperate desires into preferences. And fifth, channel the energy of desire toward your highest purpose rather than letting it control you. These 5 lessons have worked for 2,000 years because they're based on how human psychology actually functions rather than wishful thinking or motivational fluff. And if you implement even 1 or 2 of them, you're going to notice a dramatic shift in your relationship with desire within weeks. Now, if you're serious about making this transformation permanent, and you want the complete framework for reprogramming your subconscious mind around desire, success, and self-control, you absolutely need to check out the Subconscious Millionaire System that I've linked in the description, because that system gives you the exact tools and techniques for rewriting the deep patterns that drive your desires at the subconscious level. And when you combine that with these 5 Stoic lessons, you create an unstoppable combination for taking back control of your life and channeling all your energy toward what actually matters. Make sure you click that link right now while you're thinking about it, because the gap between knowing this information and actually implementing it is where most people fail, and that system is specifically designed to bridge that gap and make the transformation stick. So check it out, and then subscribe to this channel if you want more ancient wisdom combined with modern psychology to help you build the life you actually want instead of the one your conditioning is pushing you toward.